So there are some interesting caveats to copyrighted materials. Um, there is something called fair use that permits the use of copyrighted materials without the owner's permission under specific circumstances. And those circumstances are outlined as, if it is for criticism or commentary, news reporting, or it's teaching, scholarship, and research. So fair use is not a blanket exemption from copyright law. Instead, it's a little bit more flexible. You have to look at it on a case-by-case standard and consider several factors whenever you are determining whether or not it falls under fair use. So anytime that you're evaluating fair use, you have to think of what is the intended purpose and the character of the use. So you have to, the law or the courts are going to examine if the use is transformative, meaning that it adds something new with a further purpose, or a different character, altering the original work with new expression, meaning, or message. Also considers whether the use of commercial or nonprofit educational, or it's educational in nature. So for transformative use, I look at this as you're taking something that exists but putting enough twist on it that it's not. So if it adds a new expression or meaning to the original work, such as through a parody, commentary, or criticism, it's more likely to be considered fair use. Commercial versus nonprofit. So for nonprofit educational uses, as more likely to be fair use than for commercial uses. But even commercial uses can qualify if they are sufficiently transformative. I'm just running around in circles on all the legalese, right? This is where I live most days. So, for example, a film critic uses a short clip from a movie to create a review that offers new insight and critiques the original work. The use is likely to be considered fair use because it is transformative and serves a different purpose than the original film. So, the nature of the copyrighted work, they'll consider the following the use of factual works. So biographies, news articles, and academic research is more likely to be considered fair use than the use of highly creative works such as novels, music, or movies. So courts will kind of take a look at that and determine from there. So for example, quoting a few lines from a scientific study in a research paper is more likely to be fair use than quoting several paragraphs from a novel in a commercial book. I think they also they kind of consider the quantity and quality. So if you use a smaller portion, it's more likely to be considered fair use. However, even using a small portion can weigh against fair use if it constitutes the heart of the work. And the quality. If the portion used is the most important or distinctive part of the work, it may not be considered fair use, even if it's a small portion. So, for example, a professor photocopies a single chapter of a book for use in a class discussion. If the chapter represents a small, non-essential part of the book, this may be fair use. However, photocopying the entire book would likely not be considered fair use. So kind of get a different example for all of those there. So they also look for effect on the use of a potential market for the value of the copyrighted work. So, for example, they assess whether the use could harm the market for the original work or its derivatives, if the use could substitute for the original work and reduce its sales, it's less likely to be considered fair use. So you create something close enough to the original that you push the original work out. So, for example, for the market impact, if the use directly competes with the original work or could serve as a replacement for it, this weighs against a finding of fair use. So, for example, if an individual posts an entire movie online for free viewing, this could significantly harm the market for the original work, making it unlikely to be considered fair use. And, making sure that you're revisiting, the fair use in specific contexts. So criticism and commentary, for example, a blogger writes a review of a newly released book and includes brief quotes to illustrate key points. This use is likely to be considered fair use, and it adds new meaning and serves purpose of criticism. So again, you're looking at the purpose of whatever, is being questioned. For news reporting, a news program shows a short clip from a music video to report on the artist's latest album. This is likely fair use as it informs the public about the news without replacing the original work. In the instance of teaching, scholarships, and research, a professor uses an excerpt from a copyrighted article in a classroom lecture, or a researcher quotes a few sentences from a novel in a scholarly article. These are typically considered fair use because they serve educational or scholarly purposes and do not compete with the original work. You see how it does not compete with the original work. It's something different. Cannot compete with the original work. So when these things are being evaluated in the court of law, the potential risks start to become the legal uncertainty. Because fair use is evaluated on a case-by-case basis, there is always going to be some risk that a court might not agree that in this particular instance that it qualifies as fair use. So you are kind of, it could end up being ruled one way or another. You are technically using somebody else's stuff. Are you using it with one of the purposes that are considered under fair use: criticism and commentary, news reporting, teaching, scholarship, and research? If it's questionable, if it's gray, maybe not. And if the court determines that it's not fair use, you could be liable for damages, including statutory damages, attorney's fees, and other costs. So be very, very careful whenever you are using somebody else's stuff or quotes from somebody else's stuff. You want to make sure that you're using it correctly.